This video is for The Living Earth, Unit 4.1, Genetics. Today's essential question is, how do genes determine inherited traits, and how are those traits expressed? First main idea, Gregor Mendel's pea plant experiments. All organisms of the same species have common characteristics. Colored eyes or hair, for example. However, members of the same species exhibit variations in these characteristics. For example, eyes or hair may exist in a variety of colors. These differences in an organism's characteristics are called traits. Blue eye color is one trait for eye color. Some other traits for this characteristic include brown eyes or green eyes. To investigate how organisms inherit traits from their parents, Gregor Mendel bred pea plants. He observed particular traits that appeared from one generation to the next. To keep things simple, he chose to track only those characteristics that came in just two forms. He studied the traits of white or purple flower color, for example. Mendel also made sure to use parent plants that were, quote, true breeding for each trait. If, after many generations of self-pollination, a purple flowered plant produces only purple flower offspring, it is considered true breeding for purple flowers. Mendel's scientific method included crossing two contrasting true breeding parents for two different traits for a particular characteristic. A classic example is the cross between a white flowered plant and a purple flowered plant. These plants are the pea generation or parental generation. He carefully observed the flower color exhibited by a large number of offspring. These offspring are called the F1 generation for first filial generation. He then crossbred plants for the F1 generation with each other. The offspring are called the F2 generation for second filial. And so we can ask, what were the resulting flower colors for the F1 and F2 generations? The results of Mendel's experiment. Surprisingly, Mendel found that all of the F1 generation plants had purple flowers, even though one of the parental plants had white flowers. Mendel wondered whether the trait of white flower color somehow disappeared during the breeding process. This turned out not to be true. When Mendel crossed the purple flower F1 generation plants with one another, approximately 25% of the F2 generation had white flowers. In other words, there was a 3-to-1 ratio of purple flowered plants to white flowered plants. Mendel obtained these results over and over when he studied the traits for other characters such as pea shape and pod color. Mendel concluded that differences in inherited traits result from alternative versions of genes, which Mendel called factors at the time. We now know that these refer to differing versions of the same genes that we call alleles. Mendel also realized that organisms inherit two copies of each allele, one from each parent. He noticed that of the two inherited alleles, one would be expressed while the other would have no effect. Mendel draws conclusions about alleles. Based on his experiments, Mendel concluded that if an organism inherited two different alleles for a given character, one allele would fully control the appearance of that character, and the other would not have any effect. In the case of the traits purple and white pea plant flowers, the purple allele was fully expressed, and the white allele was not expressed at all. Only when members of the F1 generation were crossed did the white flowers appear in the F2 generation. These white-flowered plants did not inherit any purple flower alleles, but inherited 2 copies of the white allele. Alleles that always appear when they are present, such as the purple flower allele, are called dominant alleles. Alleles that are not manifested when a dominant allele is present, such as the white flower allele, are called recessive alleles. Recessive alleles only show in the phenotype when there is no dominant allele. Alleles are often represented by single italicized letters. Dominant alleles are represented by capital letters, and the recessive versions of the alleles are represented by the lowercase version of that same letter. In this case, capital P represents purple flower color, and lowercase p represents white flower color.
Let's say a flower has a dominant allele, R, which produces a red color, and a recessive allele, R, which produces a white color. Flowers that have the RR allele combination will produce red flowers, and flowers with the RR combination produce white flowers. However, flowers that have the heterozygous allele combination RR will produce red flowers, because R, or red, is dominant to R, or white. Here are just a few examples in humans of dominant and recessive traits. Hanging earlobes are dominant to attached ones. Being able to roll your tongue is a dominant trait to not being able to. And although eye color varies widely, blue eyes are typically recessive to non-blue.
Homozygous versus heterozygous. One of Mendel's conclusions was that organisms inherit 2 alleles for each character, one from each parent. In the case of flower color in the F1 generation, the pea plant offspring inherited an allele for the white flowers from one parent and an allele for purple flowers from the other parent. An organism that contains 2 different alleles for a given character is heterozygous for that character. In the F2 generation, the white-flowered plants contain 2 alleles for white flowers. When an organism contains 2 identical alleles, it is homozygous for that trait. An organism can be homozygous recessive, which is to say if both alleles are recessive, or it can be homozygous dominant, meaning both alleles are the dominant version. Consider the genetic character of eye color. The allele for the trait brown eyes is dominant. If you have brown eyes, you might have 1 brown eye allele and 1 blue eye allele. In this case, you'd be heterozygous for eye color. Alternatively, you might have 2 brown eye alleles, making you homozygous for eye color. Genotype versus phenotype. How many physical characteristics such as eye color can you think of? Now, note there are a huge number. They include characters such as nose size and shape, earlobe attachment or detachment, and the presence or absence of a widow's peak on the forehead. They even include eye shape and the length of the second toe. An organism's phenotype refers to its observable traits such as blue eyes or curly hair. In contrast, an organism's genotype describes precisely which alleles are present. Consider the case of human earwax, a characteristic controlled by a single gene with 2 alleles. This person has the phenotype of wet or runny earwax. However, his or her genotype may include one of 2 possible combinations. Either 2 wet earwax alleles or 1 wet and 1 recessive dry earwax allele may be present. An organism's phenotype does not usually give enough information to determine its genotype. Only when we know the genetics behind a trait can we be certain of the genotype. For example, if we know that white flowers on a pea plant are the result of a recessive allele, we can then see its genotype. If we see a pea plant with white flowers, we know that it is homozygous for the white flower color. In this case, the organism's genotype for flower color can be inferred from its phenotype. At this point, you should be able to generate a full and appropriate response to today's essential question. How do genes determine inherited traits, and how are those traits expressed?